And what I'm going to be talking about today is trading times. In other words, when we trade during the day, how long, and all that sort of thing. I want to talk about the various sessions, and I want to talk about news releases. Okay, so let's go through each one of these a little bit in more detail. First of all, trading times. And a lot of people ask me when I trade and for how long. And people struggle to balance really their lives in terms of how often, how long should they be trading. Some people will find that they trade for too long. I often think back to when I started trading, and I would trade literally for 14, 16 hours a day. Now, I was living in Australia at the time, and the European session began at around about, I suppose, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll talk about the sessions in a minute. And then I'd trade right the way through to New York session, which I think started around midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd trade on through the New York session and end up about 12 hours later at about 5 a.m. But then I still didn't stop my trading. So, and I didn't have a grip of when the best trading times were, when the best market conditions for various trading systems existed. I didn't really know what news releases were coming out. In fact, I didn't even know what the sessions were until I found out, and then I put 3 clocks on my office wall, one for each time zone, one for the European time zone, one for the New York time zone, and one for the Asian or Tokyo time zone. So let's talk about time zones first, or sessions. Now, first of all, we have 3 sessions, 3 major sessions, which really extend over the full 24-hour period, 24 hours. So there's 3 sessions, 3 separate sessions, roughly of equal length. And the first session in the day is the Asian session. And this starts when Tokyo, I've forgotten how to spell it, I think it's Tokyo. This is when Tokyo opens up. In other words, when the Japanese Tokyo Stock Exchange starts, when it opens up, and that's when the market begins to move. Now, one of the characteristics of the Tokyo session is that it's the quietest session. It's generally quiet, and we have a lot of range trading. And the market often ranges, and the reason for that is because the Tokyo market, or the Asian market, is the smallest market. That's when the least business gets done, and traders, the big centers in London and Europe and in the US, they tend to have all the volume. That's when people do the most trading. So the Tokyo session is quiet. Now, I'm not sure what time zone you're in, of course, but the Tokyo session follows the New York session. So roughly when New York markets close, that's when the Tokyo markets begin, or the Asian session begins. And that would then extend right the way through to the London or the European session. So the next one is the London, I call it the London session. And this begins at around about 9 a.m. GMT. Actually, perhaps even 8 a.m. And this one tends to be the busiest because the London market, the London currency session, is the biggest in the world. So that tends to be the biggest, or the busiest. And it also tends to be the most technically sound session. Okay, in other words, the market moves much better according to technical parameters. So you'll get more trends, more consistent moves, more reaction off various technical indicators. And I've actually been I've actually traded for a bank in Europe, and I've traded with them through that session, and the amount of activity is enormous. And on one floor of the Forex area in this bank, there were probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 traders busy trading, and that was just in one bank, and I'm talking about large amounts of money. So the London session tends to be the busiest, and then we go into the New York session. And of course this starts at around 8 to 9 a.m. in New York, which is Eastern time in the States. Now there's a fair amount of volume during the New York session. Volume's okay, but this session tends to be affected by news. News is the biggest influence on the New York session, and there are various news items that come out during the day. A lot of it takes place at around 8:30 a.m. So you'll see at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, there's often a huge move or a large move in the market. So let me summarize these. The Tokyo market tends to be quiet and range quite a lot, and the moves are small, or generally small, except perhaps for the yen. The trading in the yen can be more active during the Tokyo session, and obviously that makes sense. And then following that, we get the London session, and this tends to be the busiest session, the most technically sound. In other words, technical trading, which is what we do, tends to be easier and make more sense and be more predictable. And that starts at around 8 to 9 a.m. GMT, or in London. Actually, the London session then sort of squeezes into the European session, and that follows just a couple of hours later, or an hour or two, depending on the time zone difference, depending on daylight savings. So the London session then moves into the European session a little later, and then the combination of those two, combination of London and Europe, creates this huge volume. And so I'll talk about trading in that session a little later. And then after that, we move into the New York session, which starts around 8 or 9 a.m. New York time, Eastern time, and that's generally 2:30 or 3:30 p.m. in London. So at that time we get a combination of New York and London and Europe, and that creates quite a lot of volume. But the problem with that volume in the New York session is that you get large and unpredictable moves because of the news releases that take place in the States. Now, why do the news releases in the States, and I'm talking about economic news, the news releases in the States, why are they so important? Well, because the whole world basically watches what goes on in the States in terms of the US economy, and whatever happens there has an effect on the whole world, and that's why a lot of traders, a lot of banks and businesses react to the US news. All right, so that's it. 3 sessions. Try and just this will be in your notes, but the characteristics of the sessions: Tokyo, quiet and ranging; London, busy, technically sound; New York session, also busy, but prone to large and often unpredictable moves because of the news that comes out. Most of it comes out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, but there are other bits of news that often come out during the day, and there are also other things that affect the markets during New York, such as, for example, Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Reserve, of the Fed, if he starts speaking, and the things he says, and so on and so on. But I'm not going to go into too much of that right now. I'm just going to talk about the effect of news and how we should be trading around news times in a little while's time. So those are the trading sessions. Now, depending on what time zone you live in, you're either going to have to, let me just clear the screen. And get a new piece of paper, because I've already scribbled all of this. So depending on what time zone you live in, that's you, you're either going to have to decide to trade outside your time zone. In other words, you might have to trade during the night, which is tiring, or you're going to have to trade in your own time zone, which might not be the ideal or optimal trading session to trade in. So bearing that in mind, I'm now going to talk about which time zones are the best to trade in, and you'll have to decide and observe and keep an eye on things and really try and decide whether you're going to trade outside normal hours or you're going to trade in your normal time zone hours and accept the consequences of that. So let's just summarize. We've got Asia, and then we've got Europe. I'm going to just say Europe stroke London, and then going into that we've got New York. And in fact, somewhere or other on some of the websites and trading related websites, you can get a little schematic of how they run into each other and overlap, but that's not too important. Now I start trading at around, now I'm in the European time zone. I start trading, in fact my time zone here is actually Central European time, CET, and you're going to have to do a bit of work on what all these time zones are: CET, Asian, Tokyo, New York session, and so on and so forth. And even if you're in the States, there are vast time zone differences from the east to the west coast. So if you're living in California, I think I don't know how many hours, 5 or 6 hours on the other side of New York. So all right, so let's get back to this. I start trading at around about well, somewhere between 6 and 8 a.m. CET. That's when I trade. That's when I start, and I go through to about 5 p.m. CET. Now, I'm not saying I trade throughout those hours every day or even throughout the day, but that's the sort of range of time that I will consider trading in, and really nothing outside that. Now let's have a look at what that covers. Well, the Asian session extends into that time a little bit. Now remember, the markets in Europe only open at about 8 to 9 a.m. So I'm starting a little bit before the European session starts, and in fact sometimes I even start at 5 a.m. So I'm catching the tail end of Asia. I'm catching the tail end of that, and often at the end of the Asian session there is some activity that takes place after the quietness of the Asian session, and the activity is caused and this takes place before the European session starts. So the activity at the tail end of the Asian session is often traders who want to take advantage of the low volumes, and in fact I know a bank trader in Sydney who prefers that particular time zone, that particular little 2 or 3 hour section, because by trading fairly large volumes at his bank and taking advantage of the very thin and quiet markets, he's actually able to move the market in his favor to some extent. Whereas you and I and just about everyone else during the major sessions, when the volume is huge, won't be able to move the market at all, simply by placing orders in. For example, if you put buy orders in huge volumes, it should drive the market up. But the Forex market is so huge that that's very unlikely to happen unless you're trading in this sort of what I call is a sort of the dead zone. And that's that little bit there between, let's say, between 5 and 8 a.m. CET. Right, and then we get to 8 a.m. CET. So I've been I've been observing things for 3 hours or so. From 8 a.m. CET, we move into the London and European markets, and then we hit the big volumes right here. And because this is big volumes, as I said earlier, it's more technical. I know this is a real scribble, and once again I have to refer you to the transcripts if you want to make more sense of this. And I've got two varsity students busy doing this for me, and they're very good. And let's get back to this again. I'm being distracted. The European time zone. So I trade for 2 or 3 hours before this starts in the dead zone, because you sometimes get some good moves. And then the European session is the big volume. It's technical and it's easier to trade. All right. If you happen to live in the Asian time zone, if you're in Tokyo or Hong Kong or Sydney or even as far across the sea as New Zealand, you'll be trading in the Asian time zone. And unfortunately, it's not the best time zone to trade, although there can be some good moves in there, but often you'll find that there are no signals given. So the solution to that is either to trade during the day and accept that the market's not going to give you as much as it will in other time zones, or you can trade during the night, which is what I used to do. But make sure that if you are trading at night, you trade sensibly, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, I carry through to 5 p.m. CET, not actively trading necessarily, but just observing the market. And if I haven't had a decent trade during the previous part of the day, during the European session, then I'll continue to watch the market until about 5 p.m. to see if there are any opportunities coming up. Now, that means we're going into the New York time zone. So the New York time zone starts at around 2:30 CET, or it could be 3:30, depending on daylight savings, and it goes on. It goes on for about 8 hours after that. So, by carrying on to 5 p.m. CET, I'm going about 2 to 3 hours into the New York session. So let's just summarize. I'm catching the tail end of Asia in the dead zone, when often there are some moves because of the thin markets. I'm catching the whole of the European and the London session, which is the best one. And then by going to 5 p.m., I'm actually getting 2 or 3 hours into the New York session. So I'm able to pick up any moves that begin at the start of the New York session by being potentially active during that time. So I'm covering all 3 sessions, covering the end of Asia, where there are some good moves after the ranges. I'm covering the whole of European and London trading, where the best and most technical moves are. And then I'm catching a couple of hours into the start of the New York session, when also sometimes there are a couple of good moves. All right, so that's the trading times, the trading sessions. But I want to now just get rid of that. I want to place a caveat, in other words, a word of warning or warning, whatever. At the start of the New York session, at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, that's New York in the States, there are news releases. The news comes out. This is economic news. Those are the main times of the news release. And for example, on a Thursday morning, you get jobs news. Often Thursdays is when a lot of the news comes out. I can't remember offhand what happens regularly on the other days, but as far as I know, Thursday, well, I know this for a fact, we get jobs news. So at that time, 8:30 a.m., we often get a big move. And really, it's a bit of a gamble. It's a bit of a gamble. But if we're trading technically, in other words, we're not looking too much at the economic news, often I will trade through that time. Now, people say, well, what happens when the news comes out? Do you trade? Do you stop trading? Do you exit your positions? Are you willing to take new positions on the move? And the answer is yes. I'm willing to trade during the New York news, except for one provision. On the first Friday of each month, and obviously the date will change depending on the month, we get the non-farm payrolls. And non-farm payrolls, which is abbreviated to NFP. And the non-farm payrolls is the number of jobs outside the farming sector that are created or lost during the previous month. And this is the biggest mover of the market very often, the biggest mover. And it's unpredictable, it's dramatic, unpredictable, dramatic. And I don't trade, there's no trading, I don't recommend any trading on any trading system during that time. So remember, that's the first Friday of each month. As far as the rest goes, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time in New York, you just need to be aware that there are often big moves, and you can adjust your trading strategy accordingly. You can be a bit more cautious, or you can expect perhaps larger moves. So if the trade goes in your direction, you can perhaps get a larger profit. You can tighten your stop losses if you're in a position before that, or you can initiate a trailing stop. So basically what we want to do through all this is reduce risk, but also create an opportunity for more profit. So to summarize that, yes, I will trade during that time zone in New York. I don't exit positions, I don't change my strategy, except for the first Friday of each month when the non-farm payrolls come out. Other than that, I'm happy to trade during that economic news release period. Now, that's not the only economic news release period. There are other ones. You can actually get hold of an economic calendar, and I'm just going to try and I think you can get it's a good idea to get this economic economic calendar. My writing is really bad. I hardly write at all anymore. I think you can get that one at fxcm.com. And there is another one which I use often, when the name's just slipped my memory right now. But in any event, this one's good enough. Go to fxcm.com and you can get hold of an economic calendar, and that'll tell you exactly what news releases come out during the European, during the London, and during the New York session. And you can keep an eye on those, and like I said, adjust your trading strategy accordingly. In other words, you can tighten your stop losses, initiate a trailing stop, look for more profit, and if you really want to be cautious, you can exit the market. But sometimes there are really good opportunities at that time. So go and get hold of your economic calendar. It changes every day and throughout the day. And in fact, they update it with the actual news result. So they update at the time. All right, so having said all of that, let's just summarize. We've got 3 sessions. This is in the notes, as I said, 3 sessions. You've got New York, Asia, and London, Europe. 3 sessions, and this is moves are big moves, but sometimes unpredictable. That's meant to say unpredictable. I'm just going to put you in Asia. It often ranges, small moves, generally, unfortunately, not the best time zone to trade in, but you can get opportunities sometimes, and especially on the USD JPY and the Euro JPY. And then the London session, we get big moves, but they're nice and technical and easier to trade, and this is the main session which I would recommend. Alright, so having said all that, when we do our live trading, I'm going to be online with you from around about 6 to 8 a.m. CET. Go and look that up in your on your computer. You can see it at the toolbar at the bottom, where you get the various clocks and time zones. I'm going to be trading online with you from 6 to 8 a.m. CET to around about 5 p.m. CET, and the length, or how long I trade for, really depends on a lot. Depends a lot on how the early part of the day goes. So if I've made 50 pips in the first hour, then I'll generally won't trade the rest. If I've had a couple of losing trades, I might go through to 5 p.m. Now, one more caveat: when I say 5 p.m., I normally don't enter a new trade after somewhere to 3 to 4 p.m. CET, and I normally close all trades, close everything before 5 to 5:30 CET. All right, now this is quite a lot to absorb, so the best time to actually get to grips with all this is while we're actually trading live. And I'll be announcing to you, letting you know as soon as I've decided which days. It's normally going to be a Tuesday and a Thursday. The reason is because Mondays and Fridays tend to be more difficult to trade, sometimes unpredictable, sometimes very quiet, generally a little bit more difficult. Not to say you don't get good moves on those days, because you very often do, but I don't like to trade every single day of the week, and for the purpose of this course, I'm going to trade a couple of times a week with you, and it might not always be two, it might be one, or it might, if there's something exciting going on, or if we've had a difficult week, then I might trade an extra day. But a lot of the stuff you'll pick up as we're going through our live trading sessions, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions about all of the stuff that I'm talking about. So I think that's really the summary of it, and I'm going to touch on how long you should trade every day in one of the next videos, but generally you should not be trading more than 10 hours a day. Don't try and extend that to 12 hours or 16 hours or 13 hours. Try and minimize your trading to 10 hours a day, and also try not to trade every day if you can help it. And I'm going to be talking about weekly and daily and monthly goals right now, but try not to trade every day. And if you've had a particularly good start to the day, then if you've got good pips early in the day, then just stop. But I'm going to be talking about the trading lifestyle. I'm going to be talking about how long you should be trading every day and all that sort of thing a little bit later on. But for the purpose of this video, I've been talking about the trading times and the sessions, when I start trading, when I finish trading, when the news releases come out, how to deal with those news releases. Go and check that out. And your homework for this video will be to go and have a look at an economic calendar and have a look at the news releases, and you'll see that some of them are repeated every week, some of them are only every month, but generally they take place at the same time at 8:30 Eastern time every day. And then the other bit of homework you can do is go and have a look at the various times that I've put up here on the screen in terms of European time and New York time, and check those out to see where those are in your own time zone, and try and get that all into your head so that you know exactly when I'm going to be trading the system and how that affects you. In fact, what you can do is, like I did when I started trading, is you can put a couple of extra clocks on your wall and set them to, and just put a label under each one of them and set them to the various time zones. Okay, one more thing, just to finish off. If you're not in this time zone, if you're not in Europe, in other words, or in London, or in South Africa, or in certain parts of Africa, you might have to be trading. If you want to follow me in terms of my preferred trading time, you might have to be trading at night, or let's say very early in the morning till midday, or from midday till quite late in the evening. And that might not suit some of you. It might suit some of you who've got other jobs if it doesn't make you too tired, but it might not suit your families and your lifestyle. It can be very demanding. So you can trade outside of these times if you want to, but be aware of the drawbacks and the restrictions of trading, for example, during Asia or late in the New York session when things tend to quieten down. So be aware of those drawbacks, and you might have to adjust your targets or adjust your expectations of the trading system accordingly. But on the other hand, you might not be as demanding as I am and be quite happy with what you can get during your time zone. And it's really just a matter of trial and error. If you want to try trading at strange hours, give it a go. If it affects your life and your family or your work, then try trading during your time zone and see how it goes in terms of the ease of trading in those sessions. All right, so that's that. That's a wrap for this session. And I'm now going to compile this video, and I'll speak to you soon on the next video.